Hi, Vetfolio Voice listeners. Welcome back. We've got another fishbowl episode for you. This was the second episode we recorded in the fishbowl, so I was starting to kind of get my feet under me and really enjoy it, and we had a lot of fun. And not only was it super fun to be in the fishbowl, but it was extra special because I was joined by one of my colleagues who I'm lucky enough to work with on a weekly basis at Newberry Animal Hospital, and that is Dr. Ruth-Ann Spinosa. Now, I love working with Dr. Spinosa. She is not only a fantastic integrative general practitioner who always seems to be there when I need her. I've had a couple of cases recently that have really stumped me, and she seems to walk in at the exact moment I'm about to start pulling all of my hair out and just give me the answers that I need. It's kind of magical. She's also an owner and a leader in this practice, and let me tell you, she's way too humble, but just absolutely excels as a leader and is an amazing person to work for. For this episode, we're talking about her experience as an integrative practitioner, particularly with regard to cats. And this episode stemmed from this night not too long ago. I got home and I just had this big smile on my face because I had a text from Ruth-Ann saying she had listened to an episode featuring Dr. Nicole Sheehan about simple hacks for improving quality of life in senior dogs. She said it was great and she was glad that information was getting out there because it was so simple but so important. So I said, well, let's continue the conversation and talk about your experience with integrative medicine and specifically nutrition as a general practitioner. In the episode with Dr. Sheehan, we focused on dogs. So for this one, we decided to take a more feline-centric approach and talk about some integrative principles for cats and specifically focus on diet and nutrition and Dr. Spinosa's experience with dietary management of healthy cats and specific disease conditions. Dr. Ruth-Ann Spinosa graduated from the University of Florida College of Agriculture and Life Sciences with a bachelor's in animal sciences in 2001. She continued her studies at the University of Florida College of Veterinary Medicine and obtained her DVM in 2005. She's also a graduate of the Chi Institute. Dr. Spinosa enjoys all aspects of veterinary medicine with a special interest in acupuncture, feline medicine, and dermatology. Dr. Spinosa's husband, Chris, is a clinical with Gore, a medical devices company. They have 2 children, Emma and Ian, 1 mixed breed dog named Finn, 3 cats, and 2 guinea pigs. In her spare time, Dr. Spinosa enjoys reading, running, riding horses, and gardening. And I have to say I've personally benefited from some of that gardening. I have some of her aloe plants planted in my yard here, and the poor things seem to have survived the winter. So hopefully they'll get a chance to really thrive going into this next summer. Okay, enough about my plants. Let's get into the episode. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode. I am joined by Dr. Ruth-Ann Spinosa, who I'm lucky enough to call my colleague we work at the same animal hospital, and it is wonderful working together, working for you. You're a great supervisor.
Oh, thank you, Cassie, for having me here. It's so great to be here and see you in a whole different area than I do in the hospital.
I know, it's funny. I just take off one hat, put on another hat, and it's whole new Cassie. That's not true. I promise, guys. Same Cassie all the way around. But we're recording live from VMX. We're in this fishbowl recording
it's a fishbowl.
Yes, it is. It's kind of fun. People are coming up and there's occasional picture taking. It's kind of interesting. There's a game show next to us, so we're getting these occasional Mario sounding sound effects. So yeah, it's an interesting recording.
I had my picture with a DeLorean just a few minutes ago. I
Amazing.
Just messaged it to my family because they love Back to the Future.
The 80s were such a good time.
Yeah, they were.
Yes, yeah. I don't remember that much of them. I used to be like, no, I was born in the 80s. Now I'm like, yes, but not that much into the 80s. I'm not that old.
I remember more of the 80s.
But potentially. Not much more of the 80s, though.
Yeah. No, not much.
But good times to be had.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Well, we're talking today a little bit about feline nutrition and integrative medicine. And kind of the inspiration we had for this podcast was I had this big smile on my face when I got home one day from work and I had a text message from you that you had listened to one of the podcast episodes with Dr. Nicole Sheehan, who is a veterinary herbalist. I love talking to her, and we really get into a lot of integrative care when her and I talk, and I was so thrilled that you had listened to and enjoyed that episode. You are also an integrative practitioner,
Yes.
and so we decided to kind of come back around and maybe talk about the feline side of things. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and, in integrative care and general practice? And you wear a lot of different hats as well.
I do wear a lot of different hats. Yes. I don't like to do the same thing for too long. But I started off as a generalist. And so for the first 5 years of my career, I just did general medicine. And then I kind of got to a point where my boss was doing acupuncture. She didn't want to work as much. And I was also looking for other options of things that we could do. And so I ended up taking an acupuncture course so I could take over some of her patients. And then found this whole new world that didn't even exist. It's really just the options that we are limited to by medications is kind of sad at times. And there's so many more options there that we can use to help patients. So it really was just eye-opening. And then about 10 years ago, the practice that I work with bought a very small holistic hospital. And so I kind of was charged with getting that up and running. And so really for the last 10 years, that has been a lot of what I've done is kind of build that holistic practice. And it was not something that I had a lot of experience with. I've kind of had to seek information and learn as I go. And it's kind of an isolated field. So I was so happy to listen to that podcast because she does a lot of things that I do. And it was just nice to hear somebody else doing that. And there's so much that we can do with nutrition. And it's also a place where clients ask a lot of questions. So it's good to have some answers ready for that.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about the limitations of medications. And the more I learn about nutrition and some of these, I'm going to use the word integrative for lack of a better term, options that we have, there's so much to it. There's so much good we can do before we ever get to medications or alongside medications. And there's that ounce of prevention conversation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is prevention. Kind of our goal as the holistic practitioner is to keep the patient healthy and kind of to look at all aspects of their life and try to prevent those health issues from ever occurring if I can. And then try to heal it with the least amount of side effects if I can too.
So tell me about some of the modalities that you like to use in practice. Like I know, you use medications just like the rest of us, but tell us about some of the other things that you do.
Yeah, I still do general practice, so I still vaccinate, I use medications, I use NSAIDs, I use steroids, but I also do a lot of acupuncture. I mean, I do a lot of acupuncture, and it can be helpful for a lot of those, especially old dogs and old cats that have arthritis and things like that. We do a lot of nutritional management, talking about different diet options for dogs and cats. I do some herbal therapy, and then we also do some laser therapy, and we talk a lot about physical therapy because I think that's something we forget a lot in these old dogs and cats, that we need to keep them moving if we're going to keep them functioning.
Really, it goes beyond just keeping them moving, but those really specific exercises. So being able to offer guidance in that regard is huge.
Yeah, and there's some really just simple things that you can have owners do at home. I mean, if they can go see a physical therapist or a rehab therapist, that's great. But if they can't, I mean, teaching them how to do some sit stands at home or walking up and down a hill or walking through some sand can make a big difference for a lot of these patients.
Absolutely. Such simple things that make such a huge impact. Well, we said we were going to talk about
talking about nutrition.
We said we were going to talk about feline nutrition, but we're talking. But there's so many exciting things to talk about with integrative care because you're treating the whole patient. And I feel like many of us can do this, whether or not we have acupuncture and herbal certifications. There's a lot of things that we can do with nutrition.
I mean, a lot of it, especially looking at nutrition, I mean, I think about what's good for me and my family, and why would I not want to do the same thing for my dogs and cats that I have? So going back to feline nutrition, I mean, a lot of us have our cats on dry kibble. In my opinion, all cats should be on canned food. I find very few cats that I would recommend dry food for. My cats eat canned food. If I had enough time in my life, I would make their food, but that's not going to happen. But I feel like canned food is a good compromise for them. And, cats really need to be on a high-protein, low-carb diet. I think a lot of the issues we see with weight, diabetes, GI issues, you name it, can be solved or at least managed better with a canned diet with that higher moisture content.
I would say the way I explain it to clients is I tell them cats are notoriously terrible water drinkers. So anything that we can do to get more water into their bodies. And like you said, I certainly understand the utilization of dry kibble, food puzzles and stuff like that.
Oh, definitely. That's a great way to do it.
Mental stimulation. But that moisture content and really kind of mimicking their natural diet. When I learned more about that aspect of feeding cats, it was like a light bulb came on. Like all of a sudden things made sense. And I went, oh, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, how many block cats do you see that are on canned food? Have you ever seen one?
I have no idea, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to remember the last block cat I've seen. It's been probably a year since I've seen a block cat. Oh, you have just jinxed yourself. I know. What am I doing? No. After the last week we had, oh my goodness, in practice, I need a little emergency break.
You do.
But so, talking about canned food, is there a specific route you like to go with in general, talking to clients with canned food? Do you like to emphasize the homemade, or is there a certain type of food you like?
My clients come to me with an agenda, maybe you could say. They have their own thoughts. So the first thing I do is I just listen to them. So I need to find out where they're starting from so that I can make those recommendations. If I'm telling a client who's been feeding dry kibble for the last 50 years to 10 generations of cats to go feed homemade diet, that's not going to happen. But maybe I can talk to them about introducing more canned food into their diet. Now, I have clients who come in and they're like, I want to feed a homemade diet, and I'm going to help them do that correctly. So really, I'm going to find out where that client is and kind of meet them where they are so that we can have the best success.
I feel like I would love to get more education and be one of these amazing board certified nutritionists, but sometimes I feel like that with every topic I cover, that I'm like, oh, I would like to be board certified. I would like to know more about this and this and this. But, coming from a general practice standpoint, for, giving owners nutritional recommendations on homemade diets and things like that, how are you coming to those conclusions? How are you offering that guidance?
Yes, and one of the first things I tell my clients is I am not a nutritionist. I am not going to balance your diet for you. I don't have that education. That's a complicated thing, and there are veterinary nutritionists if they want to do that. Some of the other ways, I use balanceit.com a lot. So that's a website that I feel comfortable talking to owners about and telling them that this is a resource that they can use. We can make a nice balanced diet that they can feed long term. There are also other websites where you can buy pre-made food.
Sure.
So that would be another option. Just Food for Dogs is one that also makes a cat food.
Okay, so you're using balanceit.com to help formulate these homemade diets.
Yes. And then there are also, if we go back to dogs, I know we're kind of talking about cats right now, but for dogs, if just through convenience sake they need to feed some dry kibble, then we can talk about adding some whole foods to that. So, they can feed 50, 80% dry food and then make some, lean meats and good vegetables and fruits and add it to that food so they get some of that whole food benefits. When we think of these animals, they've been kind of developing alongside us for 10,000 years for dogs, and they're used to eating our leftovers and our scraps. They've only been eating dog kibble and cat kibble for 100 years now.
Sure. And, of course, there's a huge convenience factor to feeding kibble. I definitely feed kibble.
I feed my dog kibble, too, because it's easier.
It's making me laugh to myself a little bit, because all those owners that are like, he eats whatever is on my plate, and we're like, stop doing that. And now we're like, actually, maybe that's not that bad.
Yeah, actually, my clients coming in, they tell me they've been feeding only dog food and nothing else. And I'm like, well, you know what? Actually, if you want to feed them a little bit of something from the table, we don't want them to beg, put it in their plates, but I don't mind you sharing some of your healthy food with them.
Sure. Just cut back on the kibble when you do it.
Cut back on the kibble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Lean meats. We don't want the fat.
What about prescription diets for different disease states?
Yeah, and I do use some prescription diets. So I use a lot of GI food for dogs and cats. It's just, again, easier for the owner to use. I do tend to go towards the canned food more than the dry food, but for some dogs, it's just more cost effective for the owners to use dry food.
Right.
So, we're going to be reasonable about this. And kidney disease in older cats, again, I'm going to push the owners towards the canned food, but, I want an old cat to eat, so it's going to eat whatever it eats. And that kind of goes across the board for old cats. Again, if all they'll eat is dry food, we'll feed them dry food. But in general, I'm going to prefer canned food.
Those, I never understand that when owners are like, and I, full disclosure, I don't have a cat. My husband's allergic, but when they're like, he will only eat dry food. I'm like, man, look at this, like, stinky gravy, like full of chunks of food and vegetables. I'm, speaking about canned food here, like, and they would rather chew on the cat. Hey, I mean, to each his own.
Cats they want to make it their decision.
This is true.
And so you just have to outlast them until they decide, oh, no, I really do want this canned food.
Right.
So typically I'm going to tell owners that you got to try it for at least 4 weeks before any cat's going to even think about doing it. So just keep trying, be patient. Cats don't like change.
So tell me more about that, the trying for 4 weeks, because I don't think that's ever a conversation that I've had.
So I do get a lot of clients who tell me that their cat will not eat canned food. And I actually adopted a cat that would not eat canned food. And he was a male cat. And I'm like, you are going to eat canned food because I am not dealing with a block cat. And so you just keep putting the canned food out next to the dry food, feed him meal times, pick up that dry food when the time is done. And I would say that almost all of them over the course of those weeks will start going towards the canned food as you slowly decrease the amount of dry food.
Interesting. Okay, so let me ask you this. Let me play devil's advocate here for just a minute, because I think of, and I'm the same as you. I'm a general practitioner, and so coming not with any special qualifications to have this opinion, but when I talk to owners about cat nutrition, I talk to them about cats' natural feeding behaviors and that they do eat throughout the day, if they were to be outdoor and hunting and this kind of, wild cat. And so a lot of times I'll talk to them about feeding meals, but I don't necessarily have a problem with them leaving some dry food out for the cat to munch on throughout the day, just to mimic that natural, slow calorie intake throughout the day. Sometimes I'll encourage them to, all the time I'll encourage them, I don't know how often it happens, to maybe put that dry food in like a food puzzle that gives them some mental stimulation and some exercise. What's your feeling on meals versus, leaving some food out to be free fed?
Yeah, I think that's for every family's got to decide what works for them. So if that's what works for you, then that's what works for you. A lot of times what an owner thinks is an appropriate amount of dry food and what we think is an appropriate amount of dry food are different things. So I think using it as treats, using it in a toy, just this week for my cat who likes to get into things, we took some dry kibble and put it in a box and closed the box up and told him, go get it.
Oh, I'm sure he loved it.
Well, actually, my other cat who does not need the kibble found it, but whatever. But
somebody had fun with it.
Somebody had to find it, yeah. So great stimulation. So I think using it that way, using it as treats, and just being very careful about the amount you're putting in, because, we all see obesity in cats as such a major issue. And like many cat diseases, we overlook it a lot.
Right, because they so many of them look like that. It just looks like a cat now.
Yeah, how many clients come in and say, oh, look, my cat looks great. And we're like, oh, I think it's an 8 out of 9 on the BCS scale.
Or worse, because we see so many cats that look like that, it doesn't hang on our radar.
Bring it up.
Right, so having those body condition charts and really making sure we're having those conversations. Now we're talking about fat as an inflammatory organ and disease processes. Yeah. We could go down a whole rabbit hole there. Mm-hmm. What I'm wondering, though, is when it comes to whole foods and supplementing whole foods, are there any whole foods in particular that you've had a lot of success with that you really like to use?
It somewhat depends on the condition, because I do a lot of Chinese medicine with my acupuncture, my herbals, and so we're kind of looking at each patient and evaluating kind of what we call the underlying pattern there. So I'm actually going to make recommendations based on what that patient is showing me. So for animals that are anemic, whether they're dogs or cats, we're going to talk about what we think is colorful foods. So red meats, we just kind of instinctively feed beef when we're anemic. Do the same thing for your dog. If I have an anemic dog, I say, go get your dog some ground beef.
I gotta tell you that whenever I hear about feeding beef to an anemic animal, it makes me think about when I was pregnant with my second daughter. And this just illustrated this to me so clearly. I was like, oh, I get it. Because we had a lot going on at that point, and I was struggling to keep up nutritionally just because I was stressed out. I was pregnant. There was just a lot happening. And I remember I would get really tired. Yeah. And there was one day my husband asked me to meet him for lunch, and I ordered a cheeseburger and I ate the whole thing, and that was the best feeling in my whole life. I clearly, something in my body just needed red meat at that point.
The iron and all the other things that are in there. And also, colorful fruits and vegetables. So greens. Sometimes it can be hard to get animals to eat greens, Probably not going to do that in a cat, but still, it can be helpful. Pumpkin can be another great thing that can help in a lot of situations. Any of your colorful squashes, those kinds of things can be helpful.
Interesting. Any other disease processes you want to touch on?
Let's see. GI disease, pumpkin is a great soother for the GI. So that's
Tell me more about that, because I would think of it as like potentially
we use it for
inducing
fiber, for diarrhea, right?
Well, but I feel like so many times I go for like the lower residue with diarrhea.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, pumpkin's a lot of fiber, so technically it should kind of regulate, and I am not a specialist, so, again, I'm just a generalist. But it can regulate whether you're constipated or you have diarrhea. Potentially it's going to make it better. But in Chinese medicine, it's just a spleen qi tonic. So it's going to help if you're having any deficiencies in your stomach or your spleen, and kind of over time just kind of help boost up that part of your body.
I'm so interested in like the Chinese side of this, because I think back to Dr. Sheehan's podcast, and we were talking about anemia and being blood deficient, and some of the terminology, I feel like it fits in so well to what we're seeing clinically that I'm just like, I love learning about it.
That's why it was so eye-opening when I went through the training for it. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. That's what I actually see, and now I see why this works. So it really is just... it kind of reinforces what you're already seeing clinically.
And like you said, gives us a lot of options to address those things without necessarily having to reach for pharmaceuticals, or maybe being able to use a lower dose, or making our pharmaceuticals more effective, because we're helping to treat some of this underlying stuff. And I mean, just going back to the options, like, if all we have to treat something with is commercial diets, which absolutely have their place, and I'm so grateful for them, and I think they're very useful. But if we have a pet that won't eat it, or gets GI upset on it, and it's just not working out for that pet to feed the kibble and supplement, to have these additional options and know how to use whole foods and nutrition to really benefit our patients.
Because just like everybody else, my life is busy. I need that commercial dog and cat food. I feed my dog dry kibble, and I add healthy leftovers and treats to it. But that convenience has definitely helped a lot of dogs and cats have much longer lifespans than they would be before they had that. But we can always keep improving things, and I think there are some limitations to it. And so, with what we can add to it, we can bring that level up just another notch. One thing I tell my clients a lot is you can eat power bars and protein bars and live pretty well. You can be pretty healthy on those, but over time, we're going to find some health issues. You're missing something there. And that's where I think those things that we can add to our kibble can just add a little bit more to it. Good for colon health, and lots of inflammation in the body. So
absolutely, it's so interesting. Every time I talk to anybody who practices integrative medicine, in particular, acupuncture and the focus on nutrition and this kind of stuff. You, Dr. Sheehan, so many. I really want to dive in and learn more. I find it so interesting. I know. It's that time thing.
I think we've talked about that a lot too over the years.
There will 100% be commercial food being fed if I'm doing acupuncture certification. But I thank you for coming and talking to me about all of this, because I just find it fascinating from the nutrition standpoint in particular, but then to see the Chinese medicine principles applied to it and how it just kind of comes full circle, it is so neat. So thank you for joining me and having this conversation.
I'm so glad to be here.
Any final thoughts you want to share with everybody?
So I'm going to make one plug for acupuncture and cats.
Sure.
Because I think it is so overlooked, and they are so responsive to acupuncture, whether it is for GI disease or osteoarthritis. They are amazing patients for acupuncture, and we see results so quickly. So that's my final plug for
I think that's a good one. And I can't speak to experience with the cats in particular, but I will say that you did acupuncture on a friend of mine's dog who he has too many issues to list here today, but he's also kind of mean, and he's really hard to handle. And he was on all the medications, and I went, there's nothing else I can do here from a medication standpoint. He's a healthy weight, he eats a good diet, all this stuff. And I said, I think you should try acupuncture. Let's just see if that helps. And she was blown away. She said he really did well and he loved it.
Well, great. I'm so glad that he had that response to it.
Yeah, so now I will keep that in mind too for feline
Yeah.
patients that, for treating arthritis in particular or other things.
They do great for arthritis. Dogs, cats, I mean, they both respond very well to arthritis. Really, you can use acupuncture for anything. You just may not get as predictable of results with some of the other things that we that we treat.
Sure. Interesting. And what about bladder stuff?
Sure, yeah, we can try it. For a cat that has feline lower urinary tract disease and, cystitis because they're stressed, acupuncture potentially could help with that.
Sure.
That's what I tell owners. It could potentially help. I tell them I'm not going to promise anything, but we should try it for 3 treatments, and if it doesn't work, then we won't continue
generally
that.
a do no harm modality.
Yeah, you're not going to do any harm with it and potentially help.
Well, very cool, very cool. So good nutrition, acupuncture, offering a lot more options to our patients.
Just communicating with your clients and seeing what they want.
Oh gosh, client communication. We could sit here for another hour.
We could.
Go down that road. So, but we will wrap it up for the sake of time. Thank you for joining me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Cassie. It was great being here.
Ruth-Ann, I always love talking to you. I think you're just an amazing practitioner and love hearing the integrative principles woven into general practice. So thank you so much for coming into the fishbowl and joining me for this episode. Thank you to all of you for listening. For more episodes like this, click on the Education tab on the Vetfolio website. As always, we'd love to hear your input on this talk, as well as ideas for topics you'd like to hear from us in the future. Feel free to reach out to me at dvm@vetfolio.com. You can also visit my Facebook page at Dr. Cassi DVM, and you can find me on LinkedIn. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.